Right, I feel I have to, now we've got 2 dogs on board, mention dogs on trams. My father was one of the depot managers of the tram barns, the one down here in Gaunt Street, and it was one of his jobs to check guide dog behaviour on trams. Of course, during the Second World War, soldiers and particularly pilots lost their eyesight during the war, and so many of these men were given guide dogs. And now, of course, going on public transport is just integrated into part of their training. But in those days, dogs had to sit a tram licence to allow them to get onto the trams. And it was my father's job to examine the dogs. Now, tram is pretty noisy. Thank you, see you later. A tram is pretty noisy and screechy, and it does ding ding. And of course, one of the other things on a tram is passengers. And during these guide dog trials, I had to be a passenger, and these trials usually took place in the evening after the rush hour. And my father would say to me, be as naughty as you can, so you can make sure that the dogs can cope with passengers. Well, once you're told to be as naughty as you can, the wind's totally taken out of your sails and you just don't know what to do. So my answer to that was hugging and kissing all the dogs. Yeah, so I used to hug and kiss all the dogs, and I have to say that that's probably where my great love of dogs came, because I've got one just like those little 2 there. And as far as I recall, every single guide dog passed, so that was a real plus. But that was a very fond memory of me for the trams. And this tram depot that I'm talking about is just up here on the right where Metro Bus now is, so that's where it used to be. Quite appropriately, the front of the tram barns, which were sort of stucco concrete type buildings, there were Roman pillars at the front of the building, and that seems a bit odd for a tram barn, but in a strange kind of way that's quite appropriate. Didn't think we'd get that light. It was quite appropriate because the width of a tram track is in fact defined by the wheels width of a Roman chariot. As you probably know, the Romans conquered much of Europe and into Britain, and their cart tracks or chariot tracks were all over Britain and Europe. And if you go to Pompeii, for example, you can still see those tracks in stone. And so as roadways developed, cartways developed, they followed the width of the chariot wheels. And then as we went on to other forms of transport, the chariot wheel width remained the same. So the tram track has a gauge of 2 horse bottoms, put that politely. Two horse bottoms. And while we're talking of animals, this tram, if you kids know Burma or Angelie, the elephant at the zoo, any of you know Burma or Angelie? Some of you might. Those 2 elephants at Auckland Zoo are Asian elephants, and this tram weighs exactly 3.5 Asian elephants, so that's about 12 tonne. So how are those dogs going?
Good.
Good? Are you getting off? Okay, sure. Hang on to the dogs, don't let the dogs off.
Thanks, Josh. That was very important. Thank you.
Was there talk of bottoms there? I don't think we're going to go into that too much. I'll tell you what though, I'll give you back your tram fare if you give me the dogs. Right, so the tram barn there housed just over half of Auckland's trams. 256 trams running around Auckland in the heyday of tram travel. One of the times that the trams were really important was during the Second World War. Of course there was petrol rationing, so even the few people that had cars could hardly able to run the cars with petrol rationing, and the majority of people didn't have cars at all, and so people getting to work and going out to the movies or the beach or wherever, the trams was the way they did it. So the trams really kept the cities, Auckland and all the other cities, really running throughout the Second World War. Could not have coped without them. One of the problems, of course, with the old trams at that time was with the difficulty of merchant shipping. Parts could not be obtained. A lot of parts had to be reconstituted, and brake shoes, for example, might only last 36, 48 hours because they were recycled. The tram tracks themselves were getting rather metal stressed, and so the trams probably did have to go at the end of the Second World War, or 1956 more precisely. But if that road space had been reserved and if modern trams had been put in, we might be a very different city to what we are now. Trams, of course, are a very sustainable form of transport, being electric powered. And you can see the wire ahead of us. The electricity goes down the pole that trails behind us, through this part of the tram here, and the big motors underneath. So you'll notice as I take off, I'll let the brake off, put a bit of power into this handle here, more power, let more electricity from here through to the motors, and so we speed up a bit. Then I'll shut off, and the weight of the tram will glide us into the tram stop. So I hope the two dogs have enjoyed their ride. They can go round again if they wish. They can go round all day as far as I'm concerned. So there you are, hang on to your tickets, you can stay ride with us, or you can jump off, explore and come back later.
Great, thanks very much.
Just here. Such enthusiasm. Oh, another ding then. Right. We're turning into Jellicoe Street, the wining and dining heart of the Wynyard Quarter, fish market on the right. So if the kids are starving, you can get fish and chips or fresh fish to take home. A lot of the restaurants down here are a la carte dining, so you probably don't want that if you've got the kids with you. But up here on the left is Rushworth's little coffee bar with tea, coffee, cakes, sandwiches, and next to it Gelatiano that sells ICECREAM. On the left, the Karinga Plaza, and that leads to the Tupuero Bridge that takes you over to the Maritime Museum and the bottom of Queen Street. Oh, you're taking them off now, are you? Oh. Right. You may not know, but the Maritime Museum just over the bridge there, that's free for Aucklanders. You just need to take something like your library card or a bill with your address on it, power bill or something, and that's quite a nice place to go. It traces the history of Auckland Harbour and navigation into the city. from the time of Maori through to container shipping. On the left we have the Viaduct Basin from which the first America's Cup was sailed, and of course a nice view of Sky Tower. Up ahead you can see the trees of Victoria Park. Victoria, obviously named after Queen Victoria, and her concert was Albert, and so there's Albert Park also in Auckland up next to the university. It may surprise you to know that Auckland's original shoreline was on the far side of Victoria Park. And over there is a huge sculpture of an eel or tuna, and that is to commemorate the fact that Maori used to catch tuna or eel from a stream that ran down where roughly Franklin Road is now. Used to be burned right up until the 1970s. Originally delivered by horse and cart, but later on, obviously by truck. In the 1970s it was decided that was too polluting form of way to get rid of rubbish, and so that was ceased in the 1970s. Here on the right we have a most beautifully painted structure. That is a water and sewage strainer, and on it is lovely pictures of New Zealand's native birds. It's worth a walk around there. The kids might like to have a look at those. Some of our rare native birds painted up there. On the left you can see the gardens. Scott, who's with us here, has one of those gardens. And they are owned by apartment owners and restaurants. And in there are little bits of herbs that if you want to take a wee sprig, you can. A little sprig of rosemary for roast lamb, or thyme for stuffing. Just a wee sprig, not the whole plant. On the right, the kids might like that fantastic slide that's there. They'd probably prefer the lower level, being fairly small. You can always go down with them, you won't get stuck. Up ahead, different ways of raising up water. There's a little boy just been having a play with that. Another little one working away there now. They get wet doing that, so it's all good fun. And up here, of course, is the children's playground. So something for the little ones if they want to go and have an explore. You're welcome to go around again, or if you'd like to, you can jump off, hang on to your tickets, and come back later.
We go again? Yeah. You want to go do it, Mum? Come on, come on. Yeah, we're going to go around again.
We'll just wait a moment, see if anyone else wants to get on.